What's up, guys? Today I want to talk a little bit about these rumors that are going around with the Saw franchise, Twisted Pictures, Lionsgate, and whether or not we're going to get the 11th film in September of 2025. Now, before we get into this, I want to say I don't want to make this a regular thing. There's just a lot of rumors going around with what they're anticipating, what they want for this movie, whether or not they're even going to make it, who's going to star in it, whether or not the studio itself is going to be sold to someone like Blumhouse or A24, and what is the absolute future of this franchise? Like, what are they working on? So yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, so we're just going to have to jump right into it. First and foremost, I feel like the most important thing to talk about here is whether or not they're going to actually make this movie. I talked about this on the channel before, trying to break down all of the news that we had about the direction of the script, how everybody is happy with the script, or at least everybody who really wants to make the movie. But the holdup seems to be the producers, the owners of Twisted Pictures, and whether or not they want to sell the company to someone else or just continue to make their own stuff. It has been speculated that there is some time to put everything together, allowing for the production to continue and for the September release date to be hit, but everything would have to start coming together almost immediately. And even though the script seems to be done and ready to shoot, and everybody who's at least involved with the picture is excited to still do it, it's going to have to turn around really aggressively in the next coming months, probably having to be filmed or at least being set up and everything ready to film and filming throughout March and probably a little bit of April. The big thing here is that the Saw films aren't really CGI heavy. There is some here and there, but just in general, a lot of this is practical effects. So long as they can put it all together and film it in camera, then the editing process and cutting together the score and pretty much everything else that you have to do is at least doable in the time that they have allotted to themselves. The worst case scenario there being that they can release it in October instead of September, although given the success of Saw 10 and just the lead up, especially since you allow people to kind of discover the movie into the October months and it plays better in October just in general, I feel like going back to the if it's Halloween it must be Saw mentality where you're releasing it the last weekend of October or the second to last weekend of October where you're allowing for the build up into Halloween just doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. September was a really good release date for the last film, and I feel like they have to continue that with any release for the future. The biggest rumor here that I want to talk about and get y'all's thoughts and opinions in the comments is apparently Blumhouse and A24 have been approached by Twisted Pictures about acquiring the entire studio and essentially acquiring the rights for any future Saw movie going forward. There's a couple of things about this that I love and a couple of things that I absolutely hate, and we're just going to have to discuss this in turn. First, I've seen so many people online give disdain or hatred, just throwing shade all over Blumhouse. There is just no sense of how much horror fans have really soured on this studio since what they did with the Exorcist movies, as well as the last couple of Halloween movies they did. I personally really like Kills and Ends, but I know the vast majority of major horror fans really did not appreciate or care for those movies. So you get this sense that people don't want to see the dumbed down, watered down version of Saw that Blumhouse can bring to the screens. I think the thing that's most exciting for me if you're talking about Blumhouse acquiring Twisted Pictures and thus getting the right to make more Saw films is that Jason Blum recently partnered Blumhouse with Atomic Monsters, which is James Wan's, kind of baby production company. And then you also have Jason Blum working pretty exclusively recently with Leigh Whannell. These two guys created the Saw franchise. It would be freaking phenomenal if they were to come back together and do something unique, original, and fun with the Saw brand. One of the things I've argued is I would love to see Blumhouse partner up with Leigh Whannell and James Wan for James Wan to produce a trilogy of Saw films that are written and directed by Leigh Whannell that either take place in the already established universe from the first 10 films, or maybe even they go the Halloween 18 route, where you're essentially stripping everything of its parts and just doing the basic bare minimum. Maybe the first 3 films in the series happened pretty much the point where Leigh Whannell and James Wan exited the franchise in the first place, and then you're going out of your way to reestablish the brand, do something different without Amanda or John or, the concept of Hoffman and everything. And we have a bit of an Elseworld story or an alternative universe like we do with the Halloween franchise. I'm not saying that's going to be the best alternative here, but I am saying that it would be interesting to have the creators of the franchise back in a very creative, forward-thinking role and doing something unique with it that stretches between not just one movie at a time like Twisted Pictures has done before, but you do something a little bit more akin to what Blumhouse has been doing recently in greenlighting 3 movies in a trilogy going forward and seeing how they do. Personally, as a Saw fan, I would hate to lose the canon, but the idea of getting 3 films guaranteed, that might be enough to sway me one way or the other, especially if Leigh Whannell is going to be a major creative force going forward, because outside of his Wolfman movie, he's pretty much hit the nail on the head with every attempt at a creative outlet that he's ever done. Saw, Insidious, Upgrade, The Invisible Man. Like, literally, this guy doesn't miss, and when he does, there has to be something else that went on with that Wolfman movie. The biggest con there, which I'm sure you've already guessed, is doing something completely different, rebooting the franchise as a whole, not only gets rid of the script for Saw 11, which, from what we've heard, everybody who's creatively involved with it is happy with that direction and wants to see that movie made, so that would be kind of a bummer. Also would be getting rid of Tobin Bell, which he's the face of the franchise. It would be really hard for Leigh Whannell and James Wan to reboot the entire franchise and still use him. Not impossible, but it would also, he died in 3. That's the most logical jumping off point to do something completely different with the legacy of John Kramer's Jigsaw character from those first 3 movies and then doing something unique and original. But you're kind of getting rid of the canon from 4 all the way through 10, and you don't do something with 11. Seems like a bit of a waste, especially when Tobin Bell is still alive, kicking, and wants to be a part of the franchise. He's the face of it. Getting rid of him would be a huge detriment and something I would see them doing, but maybe begrudgingly. All that being said about Blumhouse, I don't see any benefit for A24 getting the Saw franchise. There were and there has been a lot of discussion or rumors surrounding the idea of doing a Saw television show. If you're interested, you can check out Phantom Limbs by Jason Jenkins. He is a writer for Bloody Disgusting. This is a fantastic book where he kind of chronicles various creative things that just didn't happen for a lot of horror franchises. Certainly worth picking up. Not even an endorsement. I mean, I talk to him every now and then. Really cool guy. Fantastic book if you like horror stuff. Anyway, even though that book details at least a concept for a Saw television show that was built around the time that Saw 6 was bombing in the box office, and they had to switch course with Saw 7 and 8 to one movie, and then just that concept of their television show didn't really make sense anymore. I'm not going to spoil that for you. That's kind of beyond the point here. There were rumors just a couple of years ago about the producers of Twisted Pictures wanted to do something with the Saw franchise, not just movies and video games and what they've done before, but also jump into the idea of the small screen, something for streaming services that takes place in the Saw universe. And recently we've heard that there was at least a writer's room put together for that kind of concept, but it didn't come together and everything was scrapped. That being said, if A24 were to take advantage of the Saw franchise, I can imagine them doing that. Although they did get the rights for Friday the 13th, and that show has yet to materialize or do anything of note. So yeah, it's possible that A24 might be the best direction for a Saw television show, but their track record just doesn't prove that they can do it to me. Maybe I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. More than anything about this particular update video, I want to get everyone's thoughts and opinions about Saw 11 potentially getting canceled, or maybe even moving to October if they just get everything together at the very last minute. Personally, I feel like we need to at least see Saw 11. I've been arguing for years now that I would love to see them do something like a back-to-back filmmaking for 11 and 12 or something. Just kind of build the story as much as possible. Stop doing it one film at a time, especially with how consistently popular these movies are, and build a story around maybe, this next trilogy that started in 10 and now goes to 11 and 12. And then you've kind of ended everything you wanted to tell with that story. Then maybe you can start thinking about selling it and doing something else with the franchise, like a television show, a reboot, comic books, novels, freaking video games, whatever they really want to do. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. And considering the lack of update or any real indication that the movie's even started filming yet or is going to start filming anytime soon, even if it's still just a rumor, I feel like there's less and less of a chance that this movie ends up getting made. That being said, there's a lot of people who are involved with this film who do think it's going to get made. So I can't tell you one way or the other. It's still on the schedule. If it is going to be delayed or canceled or whatever it is, we're probably not going to know until March or April of this year. So we do have some time to wait and see what's going to happen. Maybe we'll have a better idea about this during CinemaCon this year. But again, that's just like a couple of months away. Anyway, all right, guys, when it comes to the Walking Dead universe, I feel like I have a lot to say. I'm a big fan of this franchise. I've read the comic books, I've watched the television shows, I made my way through Fear the Walking Dead, even though that show's rough. It's bad. Same thing with, World Beyond, all the major spin-offs, Dead City, Daryl Dixon, The Ones Who Live, Tales of the Walking Dead, just literally everything. And I feel like it's worth mentioning at least right now because apparently The Ones Who Live has been a major hit over on Netflix, which admittedly makes a lot of sense. A lot of people who stuck with the franchise after the whole Negan and Glenn incident were pretty much done with the series after Rick Grimes was taken off into the sunset by the CRM. And even though this show itself is a little bit old, we've talked about this on the channel before, the idea that AMC just wanted to get rid of The Walking Dead off of Netflix. They canceled the main show, not because of actors leaving, not because of a lack of source material or anything else. It was this lifetime contract that AMC had with Netflix that allowed for Netflix to have the rights or the streaming rights to The Walking Dead so long as The Walking Dead was still airing new episodes. And during the streaming wars and bubbles and all this other stuff of the pandemic era, and that everybody was really rushing to have premium streaming content, AMC decided, hey, it would be better to get rid of The Walking Dead entirely, but continue it through various spin-offs and other legally distinct things that aren't The Walking Dead and put it on our own platform. And then once The Walking Dead had literally been dead and gone for however many years, then they would be able to take the entirety of the 11-season show and put it on their own streaming platform, along with all of these spin-offs and everything. And then maybe bring everything together to a culminating 12th season-like series where all these characters come back together and you can end the story, or at least that specific phase of the story. It all made sense and it was all going well and according to plan until the streaming bubble burst. And Netflix decided, hey, we won everything. And everyone just decided, yeah, Netflix pretty much won the streaming wars. Let's put everything we have or have been making exclusively for our own streaming networks onto Netflix, and hopefully that causes enough cultural conversation, as it were, to bring people over to our streaming networks so they can see these shows as they come on. The thing is, The Ones Who Live, or something like Daryl Dixon or Dead City, which didn't make as big of a splash, those shows went to Netflix. People started watching them because they're not subscribed to AMC Plus like myself or maybe you watching this, and they're starting to learn about it. So the show pops off in popularity and maybe is bigger than it ever was over a year since it was released. It's just the nature of the beast. This is something that we are going to have to look forward to for the foreseeable future. That said, because The Walking Dead at least is on everyone's minds and is taking in some major social media acolytes right now. The idea that AMC, Scott Gimple, and all the people creatively involved or financially involved with the continuation of the Walking Dead universe, the idea that they're now rethinking, retooling, and figuring out the next phase of this franchise makes a whole lot of sense. One of the biggest rumors right now is that Ross Marquand and Seth Gilliam, who are Aaron and Gabriel respectively, that rumor of them putting together a spin-off for those specific characters to go off and do whatever they want, those rumors are starting to pile up again. And the recent one is, not only are they going to do the show, they've been developing it for the last couple of months, if not years, but they're gearing up to start producing and filming it set in Canada in 2025. And quite frankly, I'm of two thoughts here. One, I really like Aaron as a character. I think Ross Marquand is a very good actor, and I would really love to see him explored more, especially if he is the main focal point, because even though Aaron's character was a mainstay since season 5 of the show, he was never really given a ton of stuff to do, even though I feel like Ross Marquand is an actor, the versatility of him, and I'm interested to see more of this character and what he can do if he is the main focal point within any given series. Same thing with Seth Gilliam as Gabriel, one of the best character arcs in the entire show, from going from where we meet him in season 5 to where he is at the end of season 11, just a powerful and very capable type of character. His connection, or at least a little bit of understanding about the CRM before Rick Grimes and Michonne come back, could be something worth exploring there. But the idea to me is, if it's going to be set in Canada, there's two directions of the show that I think, or at least one direction I think, that makes a little bit of sense. One, you have the PPP cards, which everything with the PPP cards either points to the CRM and Canada, because Tales of the Walking Dead brought back the PPP cards and dealt a lot with Montreal. So if you're going to have someone like Aaron and Gabriel go to Canada for whatever reason, it would make sense to set that after Rick and Michonne come back with the CRM, and then they have the ability to get from Ohio to Canada, which, would still be possible, but would be difficult. And then considering the fact that Aaron's character was a bit of a diplomat, him and Gabriel could go to this community and get involved with them, like bring the CRM military or the Commonwealth military, whatever it is, to Montreal, and then they end up kind of being swallowed up into the bigger conspiracy there, this new community that poses a threat to not only the Commonwealth but the CRM, and maybe even builds the bigger threat for the entire universe, which ultimately would culminate with Rick Grimes, Michonne, Carol, Daryl, Maggie, Negan, Aaron, Gabriel, and everybody who's left coming together to stop a main threat, which is something that I personally really want. I know a lot of people who are really obsessed with the recent success of The Ones Who Live are upset that there's a considerable portion of the fan base who thinks we don't really care about the love story between Rick Grimes and Michonne. We really care about the fact that the CRM was built up over the course of 7 or 8 years in the main show and across multiple spin-offs, and the big threat that posed to our survivors or the entire world of The Walking Dead in general was taken out in the matter of one episode by these two characters, simply because them working together is just such a powerful force that they literally can do that. It just didn't make sense. It was rushed, and one of the biggest detriments of that show, at least in my opinion. They did kind of the same thing when it came to Daryl Dixon, where you were building up this militia force that was trying to evolve the walkers and use them as a military aspect that can go on boats between, Europe and America and all these other places. That was interesting. I would love to have seen that explored, but they did the same thing. They kind of shooed it away and did nothing really noticeable or specific with it. And that's what I'm saying about this idea of an Aaron and Gabriel show. I am not one of those fans who thinks there's no reason to do this show. These two characters are not popular enough, or they're not interesting enough to carry their own series. I disagree with that. I like both of these characters, and I would love to see them explored even more. That being said, the universe itself is done very little in order to establish why a universe is needed. The idea that these characters' stories continue, at least in my opinion, isn't enough to keep me interested going forward. I like Daryl and Carol. I love to see them back together, and I can't wait to see them try and attempt to get home. Seeing Rick and Michonne get back together and have their happy ending was satisfying, at least from that perspective. And, seeing the continued rivalry or weird relationship between Maggie and Negan is fun, if not digging up old wounds and figuring out just a way of extending a piece of drama that I felt was well regarded and taken care of in the original series. That being said, each of these spinoffs is better than they have any right to be, but as a whole, nothing's really coming together, and there's no real reason to have an extended universe worth of content if the only intention here is for continued stories of survival. There needs to be an overall threat, something to come together, and an idea of why all these characters were worth following in the first place. If there isn't, then quite frankly, I'm just going to start losing interest, and I know a lot of y'all are as well. And that's kind of why I'm saying that the PPP cards in Canada, these two characters and their diplomatic mission with the CRM or Commonwealth into a new area that we're not really familiar with, all of that kind of makes sense, and I would love to see that. But quite frankly, given the way that all of this is going, I just kind of think that it's not going to happen that way. It's just going to be a story with Aaron and Gabriel trying to survive, doing their thing, doing their job, or having some kind of issues with each other. And then it all kind of boils down to something that they are able to solve themselves, and nothing of substance is done, finished, or, tied into what's happening with Daryl Dixon, what's happening with Maggie and Negan, where does this even fit in the timeline? Do they know that Rick and Michonne are back? All that other stuff. You can see how we're left hanging on so many plot threads that just never come together and are endlessly frustrating for the people who are paying attention, which, if you're going to do a show with Aaron and Gabriel, it's for the fans, man. People do not care. The vast majority of people don't care. They wanted to see Rick and Michonne get back together because Rick was the main character for the show for the first 9 seasons. They do not care about these two particular characters unless you're the type of person like myself who was able to sit through season 4 through 8 of Fear the Walking Dead because Morgan was a main player in that show. Hey, the guy from the very first episode, that's the type of character that we want to see have a happy ending. And, nothing really comes of it. And then, because you're that big of a fan, you watch Dead City, Daryl Dixon, The Ones Who Live, even Tales of the Walking Dead, because that show was supposed to have stories for characters that we hadn't seen before. And even though they did that with Alpha, still, it didn't really come together. It was a big waste of time, and now that show might even be canceled, even though they did kind of announce a season 2, where they literally stopped talking about it and they've stopped promoting it and everything. Huge, massive failure for a lot of reasons. Maybe we can talk about that in the future. Again, I think Aaron and Gabriel are very interesting characters, and there's ways of exploring this spinoff that not only look at different areas of the Walking Dead universe that are worth exploring and are visually interesting, but at the same time, you could start building up and tying off various reasons why spinoffs are happening, why characters and situations are being developed, and how various things have worked around the world to bring everything together to some kind of culmination of the story. But we haven't seen it, and I'm not entirely sure we're going to see it. The reason I'm talking about this is no one's really been talking about this. I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but we have been hearing various things over the last couple of years that at least there was some discussion about an Aaron and Gabriel spinoff, and now they seem to be coming back around to it. So tell me in the comments section what your thoughts are on this. Quite frankly, I don't know, but I'm interested in it. Are you? All right, guys, moving on. We're going to be talking about this report from the Insider about the 4th Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man and certain things that we can expect to see from that movie. Now, before we get into that, a lot of people have various opinions about the Insider. Obviously, a lot of people think he's a hack, but apparently he's a little bit more than actually half right. It's like high 60s, so like 2/3 right at most times. So maybe at that point you're just kind of throwing whatever at the wall and seeing what sticks, but Who knows? I just think it's interesting enough to talk about, so I'm not putting a whole lot of weight here. Maybe you shouldn't either. Let's discuss it in the comments. Also, don't forget to like the video. Anyway, with that being said, he talks about this movie being a street-level film that has a very minor role for MJ, the Punisher and Daredevil coming back, the symbiote being used, and maybe even Mephisto, which you cannot have it both ways. You cannot be a street-level movie with street-level heroes that also uses the symbiote and the literal incarnation of the devil for the MCU or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever, Marvel's comic book universe, that's what I mean. He also goes on to say that Sacha Baron Cohen is the choice for Mephisto and that he would be showing up in Ironheart, which might end up being unreliable because Sacha Baron Cohen might not show up in Ironheart or might not even be Mephisto if he has to do a movie for Universal instead. And the problem with that is Ironheart has also been done for a very long time. That's not to say maybe he can show up in a post-credit scene and they use him just to kind of set him up for a Spider-Man story for the fourth film. But again, considering Ironheart has been done for a really long time, it's really weird that he would talk about Mephisto being a part of that show, but it might not be the person that he says it is because maybe there's a deal that hasn't happened yet. Again, the guy's right about 2/3 of the time. Take it or leave it. This one does seem like kind of throwing a lot of stuff against the wall, so we're going to have to, take it as it is. Another part of this rumor is that the symbiote, the little part of Venom that was left by Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock from No Way Home's post-credit scene, is going to tie into the movie somehow and find its way to Peter Parker. A lot of people, myself included, thought that was somewhat predictable considering the end of No Way Home. But then at the same time, the first Spider-Man movie of the MCU set up the Scorpion, which they never did, as well as Venom: The Last Dance, kind of negating that entire post-credit scene where Eddie Brock went from the MCU back to Mexico in his own universe, and that same scene played out just in his universe. So unless there were two portions of the symbiote left in the MCU as well as the bar that he's in his own universe, that's just, this isn't about Sony's villain universe, but the way they've handled that has been nothing less of majorly confusing, and I wish that there was a way of putting everything together and figuring out, hey, yeah, all of this is connected and all of this is its own separate thing, and those movies that we were making might not even be part of their own universe, even though there's a lot of implications that they are. The thing is I don't know. That being said, that third movie did introduce Null, which is a multiversal threat. The MCU is still dealing with the multiversal threat as is, and there's a lot of implications that say that the movies being set between Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars are going to be taking place within Battleworld, which could potentially just be, hey, New York City has been transported into this various different universe or planet or whatever it ends up being, that in-between world from Loki or whatever in the MCU. That's what Battleworld is. New York, or a portion of New York, including the Punisher, Daredevil, and Spider-Man, have been put in here, and they have to protect it street level crime style to like bigger ideas or bigger villains that might incorporate the symbiote and then might needlessly be fixed or kind of intentionally be fixed with Mephisto showing up and Peter having to do something that takes away the wish at No Way Home. There's a lot of ways that you can think about that, but is it interesting? I'm not entirely sure. The idea that everything taking place in Battleworld and there's at least some cohesion with the MCU going forward, to me, makes a lot of sense and something that I would like to see, because that whole universe has been pretty all over the place as of late. There's seriously so much going on and so little interconnection between one movie or another. And the fact that the vast majority of the films haven't gotten a sequel. In fact, I don't think anything since the start of Phase 4 has been a sequel to something that was introduced. They're going to do, Thor 5, and they're going to do this Spider-Man movie, but it's starting to look like this Spider-Man movie might just be the only main sequel that comes out between the beginning of Phase 4 and the ending of Phase 6. And that's crazy to me. So I guess the question for everybody listening is this: What do you want to see from Spider-Man 4? Because it's starting to seem like there is no real general direction and nobody knows what's going on. Nothing that has been reported makes any sense. And this movie and the way the Snyder is talking about it seems like a bunch of horseshit. The idea that you can have these gigantic threats like Mephisto, Null, the symbiote, and all this other stuff incorporated into a street-level movie, which might also be taking place in a multiversal setting and could potentially bring in, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Spider-Man. All of this is just starting to sound really muddled, and there's no real direction for any of this going forward. And that might be the case. This might just be a cluster waiting to happen, or nobody has any idea what the movie's going to be about, and it's just going to be whatever they want it to be. That being said, considering the way they've handled Peter Parker and Spider-Man's character since the beginning of the MCU, I can never see them going in a direction that allows Spider-Man to be the main focus of his own film, with it just being a story about Spider-Man and Peter Parker and his rogues gallery. They're going to incorporate someone from the broader MCU, be it Daredevil or Punisher, figuring out a way for Doctor Strange to come in, or some other heavy-hitting kind of character. Someone like, I don't know, Black Panther or something. It doesn't make sense, but it will never make sense, and that's what they're going to do going forward. Maybe even a Loki if there's going to be a Mephisto and all that stuff. Who knows? My point is that even though it was set up, I don't entirely believe that this is going to be a street-level film, and it's going to be incorporating some kind of multiversal elements. Battleworld might be the best way around that, but we're going to have to wait and see. What are your thoughts on this, guys? I feel like this movie's going to be a mess, especially if it has everything that everybody has been talking about. Like, it's going to have all of these different characters and concepts, and we're just going to keep incorporating things to buff up Spider-Man, do the best we can with it, and maybe even continue to bolster the Marvel Spider-Man villain universe that Sony is saying is either dead or just getting started or being retooled or whatever they want to really talk about it with this week. What are your thoughts, guys? Tell me in the comments. Okay, guys, very short segment here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Always helps. But quite frankly, I need to talk about this. Shrek 5 is coming out December of 2026. It was originally slated for summer of 2026 before Universal pushed the third Minions movie back an entire year from its 2027 slot to put it where Shrek 5 should have been, and then put Shrek 5 in December of 2026. A lot of stuff to think about there. Universal obviously wants to take a shot at the crown of probably one of the biggest movie years coming up, sans any type of strike or some kind of pandemic or something that would stop people from coming back to the theaters. There's a lot coming out in 2026, and we should all be very excited for that. But it looks like Shrek 5 in a December slate, that could literally be one of the highest grossing movies of all time domestically, if not the highest grossing movie of all time domestically. For those of you who do not keep up with this, the highest grossing movie of all time domestically, sans inflation, was Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which made $936 million, a little bit over. Almost $1 billion. And I'm not the only one who thinks that Shrek 5 might be able to eclipse that. Might even be able to become a $1 billion movie if it's literally the best in the franchise, or at least as good, or if not, exceeds the expectations of the first and second of the franchise. And considering the fact that the last film in this series, the Puss in Boots movie, was universally beloved, and people were really excited about the continuation of Shrek, there's something here to say that DreamWorks is at least hearing everything possible and incorporating that into the overall production of these movies. Pushing this movie back 6 months isn't just, hey, it will do better in Christmas, let's put it there. It's possibly also, this movie might need a little extra work. We're going to retool things, we have better ideas, and we're going to give everybody enough time to make the best movie possible. That being said, the first Shrek was a huge success back in 2001 with $268 million, just before the sequel blew up 3 years later with $444 million domestically, and over $932 million on a worldwide scale. And this is back in 2004, where movies did not make that much money, especially animated movies like Shrek. Now, obviously, the movies did kind of take a tumble after the third film's lackluster reception, as well as the fourth one, even though I feel like the fourth one is criminally underrated. But I think the reason why a lot of people, including myself now, are talking about the domestic potential of the fifth Shrek movie is because of the cultural relevance that Shrek still has, especially on the online front, even like 14 years later, where there hasn't been any real direct continuation of the franchise. The internet still loves Shrek. Children today are still shown Shrek. They love to watch it. People my age, this is a generational thing, people my age are obsessed with Shrek, and people older than me at least know what it is. In terms of a film's performance, you need a 4-quadrant level success where you have young people, old people, people in the middle, every man, woman, and child coming out for their excitement to see this movie. And quite frankly, when you're looking at the release schedule for everything coming out between 2025 all the way through the end of 2026, Shrek 5 might just literally be the movie that everyone can point to and say, I'll check that out when it comes here. And maybe that is all you really need for a massive 250 million plus opening. And as long as the movie's good, that holiday corridor for a couple of weeks where it can just sit, dominate, and have at least somewhat small drops every single weekend until it's hitting 800 or even $900 million. That being said, and we've talked about this on the channel before, there is some hesitation on saying that this movie can make even $600 million domestically if it's that good. And that is because Universal has been undercutting their films as of late, putting them on video on demand without the conviction of them having stayed in theaters for maybe an extra month or two just in that exclusive window, forcing people who are interested to see the movie to go out, buy a ticket, and watching it exclusively in the theaters. For whatever reason, which is probably just money and incentivizing people to go watch movies for a premium price on video on demand, which, whatever, but Universal has decided that that's the way they want to teach the audience to watch or engage with their movies, which might be a good thing for their bottom line, considering Wicked, despite its massive success at the worldwide box office, still reportedly made Universal about $30 million once it hit video on demand. So obviously there are at least some people who are interested in the movie and are willing to pay a premium to watch that movie from the comfort of their own home. But so long as the studio continuously pushes people in the direction that that is the way that you should be interacting with these movies, that you should anticipate that they're going to be on video on demand within a couple of weeks from them releasing in theaters, then again, no matter how much excitement or how good the movie is, or even how big it opens, there's just not going to be the legs or the excitement or just the draw of people going out and purchasing tickets in the theater to watch it on that term. So in a way, if the status quo continues for Universal over the next year or two, or even beyond that, the idea that Shrek could potentially be this gigantic $800 to $950 million type of movie, at least on a domestic front, goes away. And even if it opens at least akin to where episode 7 opened, there's a possibility that it falls off much harder and you're looking at like a $650 to $700 million movie domestically, which obviously is a huge success, or would be a huge success, and nobody should bat an eye at it. But again, you're looking at the difference between this massive, one of the biggest movies of all time, and the idea that there is a movie that could potentially unseat episode 7. And unfortunately, as the idea of the industry changes, as the concept of video on demand becomes more prominent for the vast majority of studios going forward, maybe we don't get to a point where a domestic run like episode 7 is remotely possible anymore. Maybe all of this is just for naught, and we're looking at massive movies instead of the culmination or the continuation of putting out the biggest movie of all time because we're never going to reach those highs again. But that's just my thoughts. Tell me what your thoughts about this are in the comments. You know something I just don't understand? The popularity of someone like Nikocado Avocado. Now, before we get into this, for those of you who just don't know, Nikocado Avocado is a YouTube mukbanger who just sits in his apartment or his car and eats copious amounts of food while crying into the camera.
I'm crying! Put it down. Oh, it's my finger! You got a rash on me! You threw a rash on me!
Now, before I lay a bunch of criticism on him or just talk about my bewilderment about his success and the things that he's decided to do as of late, I have to give him some credit. I feel like a lot of mukbangers on YouTube or just TikTok or whatever, the people who eat food in front of a camera, I think a lot of these people are fake. They're eating copious amounts of food every single day, stuff that's not necessarily healthy for you, and they're never gaining weight. They're not doing anything that you would otherwise anticipate for someone. You know, the people who eat the entire KFC menu all in one sitting, and then the next day they're eating copious amounts of ice cream. That, to me, just never really makes sense. And it's really because a lot of these people, either on shorts or on their videos, they take big bites and then they cut away before they swallow it. Nikocado Avocado does not do that. He clearly eats everything in front of him, and he does it genuinely. That's why this guy, over the course of 4, 5, 6 years, gained 300 pounds on YouTube, and a lot of people thought, man, this guy's gonna kill himself doing this for views and likes and money and all that other stuff. It's just not healthy. But that kind of gets us to late last year and him coming out of the woodwork and saying, hey, I disappeared for a year, even though he didn't really fully disappear, which is part of the reason I'm making this video. But he kind of came out of the woodwork and said, I lost 250 pounds and look at me now, I'm going to continue to do what I was always doing.
Two steps ahead. I am always 2 steps ahead. This has been the greatest social experiment for my entire life. It's alluring, it's compelling, it's gripping to observe all these unwell, disoriented beings.
And there are just so many things I think are interesting enough to discuss when it comes to that particular rug pull that he did on his audience. Why did he decide to do it this way, as well as the mechanisms that allow him to do this, to me, are part of the reason why YouTube as a career or brand just pisses me off. I think we can take those in turn. The first being, the guy decided to literally almost disappear entirely from the platform, uploading occasionally, but essentially disappear for about a year and a half, and then came back having lost all this weight, when the vast majority of his commenting section was encouraging him to either stop doing this altogether or reverse course and show everyone how he stops eating, stops doing mukbangs, and literally transforms his body by doing workouts, eating routines, and everything in relation to that, to show his transformation from 450 pounds to where he is now. And his decision was, no, I'm not going to show any of that because I guess it's not compelling enough, which to me reeks of either this was all really fake.
3.
No, I told you not to do that! 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 Why would you do that? I have to clean up all that mess! Why would you do that?
He did something in the interim to make this weight loss journey less compelling than it otherwise would be, or probably most likely of all, he made a bunch of money doing these mukbangs on YouTube. He got rich doing it, and he was able to pay someone to help with his dietary regime, his workout routine, and everything in between, and doing all of this and showing that, yes, you're capable of losing all of this weight, but you're not doing it based solely on your motivation to do it. You're not the person going out there, figuring out what to eat, buying the right stuff, cooking the right stuff, working out on the routine that you've set for yourself and are personally motivated to do, you got rich enough to get a bunch of people to help you lose all this weight, and now you're just kind of showing it off.
People are the most messed up creatures on the entire planet. And yet I've still managed to stay 2 steps ahead.
That's my theory on this, which is annoying because it's not really an everyman situation. The guy's made millions off of YouTube. He's going to continue to try to make millions off of YouTube, but he didn't want to change anything about what made him popular, because even though he likes to say he's 3 steps ahead, I feel like that was the cheapest, laziest, and most fearful option, what he did. Disappearing for as long as he did just to lose the weight off screen and not show everybody the hardship that he had to go through in order to lose that type of weight, even if he had a whole lot of people helping him. Basically, I'm saying before you want to start throwing praise at him for losing that much weight, the lack of clarity here when his entire life has been an open book for the last several years, I think kind of deserves a little bit of scrutiny and maybe less praise than what people were willing to give him when he first put the video out showing that he had lost 250 pounds. The next biggest issue I have here, and this is my issue with all of YouTube in general, is that a lot of people like to say that he disappeared off the platform entirely for like a year and a half, which is not true. He didn't post as much as he regularly would post. I don't really follow him that much, but he's a dramatic figure and I would pop in his channel every now and then. And while he wasn't posting every single day on his multiple different channels, he was posting somewhat regularly on all the channels throughout that year and a half that he wasn't posting as regularly. And to me, that kind of shows the downfall of YouTube. It's an entire platform or a career structure for people where they can literally bulk record enough videos to keep themselves minorly relevant for over a year and not have to work on themselves in other ways, but they're kind of allowing themselves to bring in money and bring in attention even though what they're talking about is not up to date. Or it's so useless in terms of what they're talking about that there's no consideration on what could occur over the course of a year or a year and a half. That's crazy to me. I can't think of another job where that would be the reality for anybody. If anybody didn't show up or decided to work through everything they had to do for the next year so they can pretty much take a year and a half off, I cannot think of another job in which that would be an alternative. And frankly, even doing that on a platform like YouTube doesn't make any sense because the interaction with the fans, the interaction with your audience is the thing that keeps you involved, the thing that kind of keeps you relevant, and the thing that makes people feel like you're worth following. If you're bulk recording and putting things out over the vast majority of months and months and months, that doesn't make any sense. And at least when it comes to Nikocado Avocado, personally, I kind of see through it. I don't like the fact that he did that. And ever since he released that video showing that he had lost all the weight off camera and having tricked everyone through bulk recording videos, to me, that makes him look faker than he was when he was gaining all that weight and crying in front of the camera on every single video. And I don't know about you, but I've just completely stopped watching. I don't think he's relevant anymore. And it's not because he's lost a bunch of weight. It's because of the reasons that I'm talking about right now.
I feel as if I'm monitoring ants on an ant farm. One follows another, follows another, follows
I don't like the fact that he hid this journey from everyone when it would have been so much more profitable and interesting to see someone go through that. Even if you did have to reality TV show it and not show everyone helping you on the back end, that is a little bit understandable. But seeing someone work out, watch what they're eating, hear what they have to say, everything that he could have done for that, and everyone knows that this would have been super successful, but he didn't. That's really interesting to me that he would decide not to do that, and it's part of the reasons why I just don't find him overly compelling anymore, because he's doing exactly what he was doing before he lost the weight now, so who cares? And the second is, what type of platform is YouTube where you can continue to make money after having bulk recorded videos for an entire year and your audience doesn't know anything about what's going on in your own personal life or anything, especially when that is literally your brand? And I feel like there's still a lot more to talk about here when it comes to YouTube as a career for people, but those are just two of the reasons why Nikocado Avocado is not interesting to me anymore. And I want to hear, what are y'all's thoughts on this? Do you like him? Is this somebody that you've gone out, you're watching every single one of his videos? Or is he just kind of an internet abnormality type of character where he's a big villain on YouTube, but at the same time, you're just watching the downfall now that he's no longer in a spiral or in a downfall? He's lost a lot of his appeal. There's more to discuss here, but I'll leave it for the comments. All right, guys, they're making a new Resident Evil movie. Now, before we get into this, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the things. I've talked about Resident Evil a lot on this channel. I played all the games up into the 7th and 8th one, and it's not because I just kind of gave up on the franchise. I have lost all time to play video games as a hobby, as well as, I've seen all the movies, the Netflix show, and pretty much all other mediums that could be explored for Resident Evil. So yeah, I'm not an expert on any of this per se, but I do know enough about the franchise to kind of know what I'm talking about. And I just have to say, having Zach Cregger come in to write and direct this movie is a really interesting choice. One, he is actually a decent director. Barbarian is a really fun movie if you've never seen it, and it definitely deserves a lot more appreciation than what it got when it initially released a couple years ago. That being said, the initial concept of this apparently has been, we want to make it darker, more horrifying, and more in line with what was going on in the video games. More of a direct adaptation of what is going on in the video games, which, okay, that's kind of what Welcome to Raccoon City was. Not that that movie is a direct adaptation of everything going on in the video games, and it certainly was way more action-packed than what we would regularly see in any of the video games. That being said, the video games don't have the best of stories. I feel like if you were to come at this around the time where the first movies were being adapted, you would have gotten a different answer from me, as well as a lot of people in the audience, saying, hey, the video games shouldn't be touched. The story that they're trying to tell is amazing, and we need to adhere to it as closely as possible. And the problem with that is, that's not really the case, especially the first 3 games, while interesting, didn't have the most coherent storyline. Now, I can imagine this new movie being a loose adaptation of Resident Evil 4, or maybe even Resident Evil 7 or 8, kind of bringing it back to its horror roots, but doing something a little bit different than what we've seen in the initial 7 films that have been produced for this franchise. That would be interesting. But just in general, going back all the way to the basics and adapting the very first game into a movie, we've seen it done. We've seen it done twice now. I mean, kind of. Welcome to Raccoon City had a lot of elements from the very first game, while the first Resident Evil was kind of a prequel to the events of the first game, as well as something that kind of planted its flag down and built its own direction going forward. Now, at least at the time of recording this, we don't have a whole lot of ideas of what this is going to be. We know that Zach Cregger is probably going to come in and do a more horror-centric story, and whether that's an adaptation of the first game or the 4th game or the 7th game or any other game in the entire franchise, we're not sure. But we can expect maybe less of an action-based concept and more of a, we're doing a straight horror movie, which would probably make it about as cheap as the original film. I think that's where they would be looking for. Something a little bit cheaper, more developed around atmosphere, not just guns blazing and figuring out all of these different things that you can use with the T-virus. I can imagine that's their direction here. That being said, since we don't know a whole lot about what this is going to be, I'm going to throw in some of my thoughts in the past about the continuation of the franchise and why I feel like they need to bring back Alice. I know a lot of people don't like her, but I think she was an interesting protagonist, and at least it was interesting enough for me to say, hey, I want to see that story continue. Will that happen? Probably not, but one can dream. For those of you who aren't aware, Netflix did a show about Resident Evil just a couple of years ago that they immediately canceled, and I can understand why. It was not good. it was actually really terrible. Outside the games or comic books or anything else like that, like on a live action format, something that I wish they could get right, or at the very least, bring it back to the old glory days of live action Resident Evil content. I will always defend those initial movies from Paul W.S. Anderson and Milla Jovovich because I think they're good, especially the very first one. Now, you can think that the second one is campy, and it is, but it works for me. The third one, for a lot of people, is the best, and it certainly has the best beginning of all 6 of them. And then it's kind of a mixed bag from there. The last 3 are incredibly campy. I think it kind of makes the second film kind of feel like a little bit of a masterpiece in comparison. But I've always loved these films. I will always defend them, and I think a lot of people are way too hard on them. So when it comes to Netflix and their attempts to recreate the Resident Evil brand, or at least revitalize it for a new audience, one of the things that came out in 2019 that kind of struck me, and I don't remember if y'all saw this and like whether or not you had any reaction to it or anything, but the idea that Deadline, at least back then, was reporting that the loose plan of the series was to continue from the Resident Evil films. Reportedly, the Netflix show was going to be a post-apocalyptic adventure set in the same world as the Jovovich action movie outings, which were both expanding the story and possibly leaving the door open for Alice to appear. This didn't actually end up happening. The idea of the franchise kind of continuing with Jovovich, especially in the wake of 2019, was not anyone's real cup of tea. I feel like that last movie, even though that last movie made over $300 million worldwide, it somewhat bombed domestically. It had gotten to a point where the vast majority of general movie-going audience in the United States were essentially done with this iteration of the Resident Evil franchise. And there was growing sentiment from fans online that thought that the best way forward was going to be doing the live action again, but at the very least, doing it in a way that was consistent with the story of the games, with the visual style of the games, and the characters from the video games. And while Netflix did not do that even a little bit, they did do Welcome to Raccoon City, if that was the name of that movie, which bombed also domestically again. Same as the movies that we talked about earlier. Those movies came out during the pandemic, so it's not a one-to-one comparison. It might have done better, but the box office was recovering by the time that movie came out, and I don't remember seeing a whole lot of fanfare for it. I myself thought it was an okay movie, but again, I don't think it holds a candle to that original. And I feel like if Netflix still has the rights to this show or to this series to make more content, if you're not going to try to do another iteration of the movie in the style of George A. Romero, kind of like the very first game, or, swing for the fences and just do maybe a Resident Evil 7 adaptation or some kind of Resident Evil 4 adaptation or a Code Veronica adaptation and just kind of skip over the first 3 games of the series, then I think the best iteration of the franchise you can do going forward is simply just bring back Milla Jovovich's character and do a show set within that world like they were talking about in 2019. I've talked about this a little bit where it comes to her character Alice and why I think she needs to belong in the video games. They need to introduce her character and explain who she is. They don't have to keep her the backstory. They can recreate it for the games to make it consistent and fit within the video games. But it would be really fun to see her and use her abilities. And I know the movies have introduced characters from the games and have killed them off, and then it's tried to act like it has like a consistent through line throughout all 6 films, which it certainly doesn't. But I'm a fan, and I feel like it's really time to bring back this story and tell it for the fans. As much as anybody wants to sit around and talk about its failures as a story, a narrative, a adaptation of the video game, you'd be hard pressed to express like, yeah, but did people not like it? I think people domestically have nostalgia for that franchise, and I think people worldwide would accept it with open arms, like a continuation of that, especially in Japan, like they did with those first 6 films. And it could operate as a decent success for Netflix or any other streaming service that gets their hands in it. I just think that they're not probably going to adapt more stuff in the world of the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil franchise, and they're going to continue to try to mine the stuff from the video games and do stuff in relation to those games and a live action franchise. They're going to try to adapt 4 or 7 or 8 or Code Veronica or something before they do anything like go back to the well with what worked before and what worked for decades. Especially to me, when we're getting into a point where there's a possibility for nostalgia to hit, because these movies are like 20 years old, and I know they haven't been gone for that long, but I think at this point it's probably been like 6, 7, 8 years since we've gotten a movie with Jovovich. I think people could gravitate towards this and get excited for it because that's the kind of continuation in characters that they're used to seeing and they would want to see more of, especially with, and I'm sorry, but you have to talk about all these people who get so mad at female and protagonists and action female movies and stuff over the last couple of years, especially with the Marvel crowd and Miss Marvel or the Marvels coming out this past year. And they hate this film because the woke and needless pandering. Those people, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that they're going to have an issue with the continuation of the Resident Evil franchise as it was portrayed in the early 2000s, because they're hacks and this is stuff that they want to see because they're... I don't want to get into too much of this, but I think those people are hacks. I think they're grifters, and I feel like they wouldn't have a problem with this because it's nostalgic for them. And it isn't really a money-making situation, so they're going to let it pass. I don't know. That to me, that's just my personal opinion. The point being that I think the Resident Evil franchise deserves some kind of continuation and some real legitimate continuation that people can really get behind. And for what it's worth, I don't necessarily think it's going to be found in any meaningful adaptation of the story from the video games. If anything, it's going to be found in the nostalgia that people can bring to the series based off their interactions with the movie, because I think people like me, those people probably were introduced to the video games more so through the movies than the video games themselves, because they were probably my age when the video games came out and too young to play a mature game, but just in the right cusp of being able to see the first movie when it came out and continuing those movies, taking the love for that movie or the admiration for it at the very least, and translating into, well, now I want to play the very first game and I got to play the sequel and this and this. And then 4 came out, and then it was just like you couldn't stop playing Resident Evil and you wanted to see more and more of it. The people who played the games first, I think, are few and far between because the movie is just more easily accessible to younger audiences than those games are. At least that's the way that I see it. People might disagree, but I don't know. Share your thoughts in the comments.